This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance. They'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This podcast is supported by the Southern Environmental Law Center, one of the nation's most powerful environmental defenders rooted in the South. Right now, we stand at a crossroads for our environment, and SELC is ready to tackle the challenges ahead. It's ready to hold the line on environmental protections and ready to ensure that people have the clean air, clean water, and healthy climate they deserve, and ready to stand up to powerful interests in the courtroom, the halls of government, and communities across the South. To learn more, visit southernenvironment.org.
Marcia, talk to me about eggs.
Yes, eggs.
Marcia Brown covers food and agriculture over at POLITICO. It's almost Thanksgiving. How many eggs are you using?
Well, so my dad has had the menu planned for probably 3 weeks at this point, and we use eggs in all kinds of things, including stuffing.
I have 3 dozen eggs in my fridge right now.
Well, last week when I went to go shop for eggs in Washington, D.C., where I live, there were only the very pricey $10 a dozen eggs, so...
$10 a dozen?
Yeah, so I suffice to say I did not buy them.
If you have been shopping for eggs recently, and I'm pretty sure you have, given the season, you've probably noticed some version of what Marcia is talking about here. Call it eggflation. Over the last few years, I feel like I've developed an egg index. It's like one of the things I go into a grocery store, I check out the price of eggs, and it feels like it's telling me something about the economy. Is that actually what it was telling me?
So it's certainly one indicator. We saw egg prices skyrocket in 2022, and so did food inflation more generally. Food prices are up still 20% since 2020. And it does tell us something about supply and demand and what's been going on with just input costs. But a big factor in egg prices is this pretty bad outbreak of avian influenza.
Bird flu, H5N1, if you want to get technical, has been a concern since 2022. And it's not going away. Part of the problem, Marcia says, is that some birds seem to be getting sicker than others.
And some retailers like Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, which is where I was, only sell cage-free eggs. And so we've actually seen this year in particular, cage-free laying hens were disproportionately impacted by bird flu. So there are about 24 million birds that died this year of bird flu or were culled, and 60% of them were cage-free. So that's going to hit, retailers that only sell those types of eggs a lot harder. And our current national flock is down about 8%.
Okay, so you're laying out how egg prices have really gone up over the last couple of years, and that there are some business things at play, but really at the base of it is avian flu. What does the fact that egg prices are going up again mean about where avian flu is heading?
It's now almost 2025, so this is a long-term outbreak. And what's especially concerning is that starting in maybe January, avian flu started to circulate in dairy cattle. And that's concerning because they're mammals like us. So, there are more worries that the virus might mutate to become more contagious to human beings.
I'm getting like COVID flashbacks right now.
Yeah, I don't want to be alarmist, but still, the virus is circulating. A third of California's dairy herds have bird flu right now, and they get pretty sick.
Today on the show, how avian flu spread from chickens to cows and sometimes humans. Turns out your grocery bill may be just the first place you feel its impact. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Discover. It's always nice to get more for less. So here's a life hack that can automatically put some extra cash in your pocket. Discover will automatically double all the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. So you could get some money for this holiday season and get more next holiday season. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Did you know that you can lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com? The Federal Reserve just announced a big rate cut, and there could be more rate cuts this year and in 2025 as well. That's good news if you're looking to buy a home, but it might not be so good for the interest rate you earn on your cash. So, if you want to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio or high yield and investment grade bonds, check out Public.com. It only takes a couple of minutes to sign up, and once you lock in your yield, you can earn regular interest payments, even as rates decline. Lock in 6% or higher yield with a bond account at public.com/whatnext. But remember, your yield is not locked in until you invest. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA and SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed. Not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosures/bond-account for more info. So let's just set the table a little bit on avian flu if we could. I've been hearing about it for a couple years, but it's kind of been background noise for me because it's mostly been impacting animals, and I don't really see public health officials coming out and making a lot of noise about it to human beings.
So you're right. Avian flu's been circulating kind of under the radar for some time now, but starting earlier this year, it began to infect dairy cattle. And that was concerning to public health experts, to veterinarians, to government officials, because dairy cattle are mammals like us. And that means the virus could take on characteristics that would make it more possible to spread from human to human.
You've written about how with avian flu in birds, chickens, the herds get culled. Is that what happens with dairy cows too?
So they get pretty sick. It's like they have a bad flu. They don't really produce milk. They are taken out of production.
But they're not killed.
They're not. There are some instances where farmers decide it's too expensive to keep feeding the cows while they're sick. So they might rather get a replacement animal.
So if you are a dairy farmer dealing with cows or a poultry farmer, what is your life like right now?
The biggest change is what is known as biosecurity in the business. Poultry farmers have been doing this for a long time. Basically, when you go into a poultry farm, you shower in, you shower off. They might be rinsing the tires of trucks that drive onto the property. They're not letting members of the public in.
It's like you're going to a lab.
Exactly. And that's not about protecting you. It's about protecting the animals.
Huh.
So the dairy industry has had to adopt these practices, and that has been a challenge because they're just very different animals. They're raised very differently. So it's a learning curve for a lot of these dairy farmers.
So it sounds like they're all on high alert here. I'm kind of curious about consumer concerns. Clearly, there have been reports of avian flu being detected in raw milk, for instance. So there's the possibility this virus is making it onto shelves. Should consumers feel okay about what they're getting at the grocery store?
There might be virus fragments in the milk. There was an FDA study earlier this year that found quite a bit of virus fragments in retail milk. I think it was 20% or something. But the testing, a lot of public health experts think the testing is still not enough. And we're not detecting all the animals that are sick.
Okay, that's not making me feel comforted at all.
Yeah, but you will not be getting sick from that milk. Pasteurization has been proven to kill the virus. So if you're drinking regular milk that you buy at the grocery store, that is pasteurized. And you can look for that on the label.
Could a human get avian flu from eating infected food? Like if they are having raw milk, which is not pasteurized?
We don't know 100% how the virus is spreading. We do know that farm workers who have gotten avian flu, often had exposure to milk in the dairy milking parlor. And milk is actually where most of the viral load is carried, scientists have found. I would not drink raw milk right now, but I am drinking pasteurized milk. I still buy milk at the grocery store.
You've said there have been dozens of human cases reported, and most of them are in people who have been in direct contact with animals in a farm setting. But there have been a few cases of people infected where it's a little unclear how the infections happened. There was a California child who was infected. And in Canada, there's a teenager who's in critical condition. This follows a couple of cases in Missouri in October in people who are not connected with the poultry industry, I don't believe. What are these cases telling us?
I'll start with just the folks who have been exposed to sick animals. And so that's farm workers who are milking cattle. And then there were farm workers who were essentially disposing of culled birds in Colorado that had been infected with bird flu. These folks, they had conjunctivitis or pink eye. It was not pretty bad pink eye, but they didn't have respiratory symptoms, which is what people are really concerned about. These other cases, like the child in California, the teenager in Canada, and there was someone in Missouri as well, we just don't really know. In Canada, we believe it was this teenager had contact with a wild bird, because it's a different strain than the one we're seeing in dairy cattle. But, people come into contact with wild animals all the time. I don't know if when you were a kid, I remember my parents would always say, don't pick up that feather. Like, birds have germs.
Yes, I remember that too.
Yeah, and maybe we should revive that. I don't know.
Yeah. I wonder if you think it's worth talking about the human cases of avian flu we've seen in other countries. Because my understanding is that in other countries, this infection's been 50% fatal. Is that right?
That is right. And that's why there's so much concern about whether the people who get this virus start to show respiratory symptoms. So far, most of the cases that we've talked about have had this pink eye, which really does not seem pleasant and is, I'm sure, very uncomfortable, but is not life-threatening the way the virus has shown itself to be in other countries. I mean, the virus has surprised people. No one expected it to jump to dairy cattle. We recently saw it in a pig in a backyard in Oregon, and pigs are considered the perfect mixing vessel because they're so close to humans, or so similar. But there, again, still is very little, if no evidence that it's spreading person to person. But there are these different strains, and that's why the public health officials are basically trying to prevent any more circulation of the virus, any more chances for it to mutate.
Yeah. I mean, can we talk about the ways that the Biden administration has tried to contain this virus and maybe ways it might have tried harder? Because I've noticed, some virologists have basically said the USDA, the CDC, and the FDA can all credibly claim they should be leading the response to this avian flu. But it doesn't seem like any one organization has been put in charge. That seems problematic. That seems like the first thing you do.
One of the challenges here is you have these three agencies, and they all have different missions. The FDA handles the food supply, the CDC cares about human health, and USDA is about the agriculture industry. And there is a business cost, absolutely, to bird flu. If you lose an entire flock or your cows get sick, as we talked about, USDA wants to make sure that farmers don't go out of business. And I mean, to that end, they've set aside, I should say, $800 million to support dairy farmers and this broader outbreak, the response to the broader outbreak. The CDC is doing testing and tracing. The FDA has done this retail milk supply test that I mentioned earlier, where they found bird flu fragments in retail milk.
But part of what you said is that there's been criticism that they're not testing enough. Like, my understanding is that places like the USDA asked farms to voluntarily provide milk for testing. But why would you do that? Like, why would you want to step forward and be like, me, I'm the one with the avian flu in the milk?
Exactly. There's this kind of fragmented response because USDA can't require testing within state lines. So they're only requiring testing for animals that are going across state lines. So lactating dairy cattle that are crossing state lines, there are testing requirements.
That is like a really specific group.
It's very specific. And it's a national industry. These animals are shipped all over the country. That's how they think the original bird flu outbreak started in the Midwest, is that these infected cows from the Texas Panhandle, which is where it started, were shipped north.
I guess I'm somewhat sympathetic to a slow-moving public health response to avian flu because we just dealt with COVID, and frankly, a whole lot of Americans weren't thrilled with what a robust federal response to that outbreak looked like, even when it was directly threatening hundreds of thousands of lives. I wonder what you or some of the sources you speak to would say to someone who feels like that.
What I've always understood about public health is if it works, you're not talking about it. If it doesn't work, then there's a pandemic. And a lot of times you don't necessarily like to do the things that prevent a pandemic, or it's difficult to do those things, or it's expensive to do those things. But that's often what prevents something worse from happening.
Yeah. It's funny. It strikes me listening to you. There's like a third way it could go, which is it works and everyone gets really pissed off about it.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. I mean, farmers, this is really expensive for them. Farmers generally don't really like the feds, coming on their property. And I think that's a real challenge here.
After the break, how the incoming administration might make things more complicated. This episode is brought to you by Discover. It's always nice to get more for less. So here's a life hack that can automatically put some extra cash in your pocket. Discover will automatically double all the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. So you could get some money for this holiday season and get more next holiday season. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Is your cold making it hard for you to get to sleep and leading to a bad morning? Switch to Mucinex Night Shift for fast, powerful nighttime multi-symptom cold and flu relief. Mucinex Night Shift fights your worst nighttime symptoms to help you get to sleep and wake up ready to go. Mucinex Night Shift. It's comeback season. Use as directed.
We're about to see a change in administration here in the U.S., and I'm really curious how you think that could impact what happens now with the avian flu.
The people I've talked to, virologists, public health experts, they've pointed out these next 2 months are really critical to containing the virus. And the virus is not going to wait until January 20th to decide whether it wants to mutate or spread more or whatever. So absolutely, this is a critical moment. And there's a lot of unknowns about what this administration will do. What we do know is that a business case can be really persuasive. And we know that the virus hurts farms. It hurts farm businesses. And so containing that virus is in the interest of farmers and the business community. And I mean, I think one of the big questions around this are these calls for mass deportations.
Hold it. Can you stop for a second? Because I think a lot of my listeners may be surprised by you saying mass deportations are important for avian flu. Can you just lay out why?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So farm workers and especially dairy workers are largely immigrants, and many of them are undocumented. And already the people I've talked to, these calls for mass deportations from the incoming Trump administration is creating another, environment of fear. And that is connected to avian flu because workers are going to be reluctant to interact with any kind of federal official, even a CDC, scientist who says this is totally anonymous. We're not going to, send your name to any government list. And that's going to make it much harder to track and trace this outbreak in farm workers who are really the first people who are getting sick from this virus. The dairy industry will be really impacted by any kind of deportations like the ones that Trump has outlined.
Yeah, one virologist I read basically said outbreaks like this avian flu, they thrive in the shadows. And it struck me because I just thought the dairy industry is filled with people who are living in the shadows, essentially. It seems like a real recipe for compounding a problem.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great quote that you found. The other piece of this I will just mention is Trump has elevated Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's a noted vaccine skeptic, to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, which handles the work of the CDC and the work of the FDA. So it's just not clear that he would support a ramped up effort to vaccinate cattle or birds or human beings if the time came.
Yeah, I'd go beyond vaccine skeptic, which I don't even know what that is. I'd say vaccine fantasist.
Yeah, and Kennedy has also talked about the benefits of raw milk, which really the benefits are not really proven and the risks are very proven. Of course, some folks want to just drink the milk on their farm and they're farmers, and that's their choice and all of that. But I think the idea of selling raw milk more broadly could create new risks from a product that pasteurization has effectively cured of those kinds of risks for a century.
So we started this conversation by talking about the price of eggs. Do you think avian flu is going to continue to put pressure on grocery prices in the next few weeks and months?
I do think so. There's not really evidence that the spread has slowed too much in poultry. If, as we talked about earlier, the national flock continues to be down 8%, that's still enough eggs for Americans, but it is a tighter supply. And when you have a tighter supply, prices do go up. And eggs are not just the eggs that you buy in the grocery store, like in the carton. There's tons of egg products. So many things we buy, packaged goods, have eggs in them. And so it's a factor in a lot of different grocery product prices. There's a lot of wait and see. I think there haven't been as many new cases in other states right now. So there's a hope that, maybe this could be contained in California and then it will kind of quiet down a little. But we really don't know. The virus continues to surprise us. Climate change has scrambled migration patterns for wild birds, and we know that that's often how poultry get the virus. So there's just a lot of open questions, and we don't really know exactly how the new administration will handle this response. A few months ago, Trump on the campaign trail said he would dismantle the Pandemic Preparedness Office, which the Biden White House created. So I think there's a lot of concern, but there's still a lot of open questions.
Marcia, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show, Mary.
Marcia Brown is a food and agriculture reporter at POLITICO. And that's the show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We are led by Alicia Montgomery. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. You can go track me down on Blue Sky if you'd like. I'm at Mary Harris. Pretty simple. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.